The crypto market has just been hit with a wave of discussion that is spreading faster than most people expected. And at the center of it all is a statement that has completely shifted how traders and investors are now thinking about XRP's long-term potential. Something unusual has come from one of the most closely followed voices connected to Ripple's ecosystem, and the reaction across the crypto space has been intense, confused, and highly emotional at the same time. When a topic like this starts trending, it usually means there is either a misunderstanding building up or a deeper financial idea that most people are not fully ready to process yet. Right now, XRP is once again back in the spotlight, not because of a simple price move, but because of a deeper debate around valuation, probability, and what realistic expectations should look like in the long term. Many investors are now questioning whether the extreme price predictions often seen online actually have any rational financial base, or if they are just speculative excitement driven by hype cycles and emotional forecasting. This is exactly where the current discussion becomes important, because it is not just about XRP price action anymore. It is about how people calculate future value in crypto markets. The key idea being discussed revolves around the concept of probability-based valuation. In simple terms, instead of asking, "Will XRP reach a massive price level?" the discussion shifts toward, "What is the probability of XRP reaching that level? And how would rational investors behave if they believed in that probability?" This kind of thinking is used in traditional finance, especially when evaluating high-growth technology companies, where investors assign small probabilities to extreme outcomes and still invest heavily based on expected value. This is where XRP becomes part of a much bigger conversation. If investors truly believed there was even a small chance of XRP reaching extremely high valuations in the future, then logically, according to expected value theory, large-scale investors would already be positioning heavily in the market today. This is the core idea that has sparked debate, because it challenges the way many retail investors think about price predictions and long-term crypto potential. Instead of focusing only on emotional targets like extremely high price numbers, this perspective forces a more grounded question. Why don't institutional-level investors behave as if those extreme outcomes are realistic? This leads to a deeper analysis of market behavior, liquidity, risk management, and the actual adoption curve of blockchain-based financial systems. It also brings attention to the difference between speculative imagination and structured capital allocation. At the same time, XRP remains one of the most closely watched digital assets in the entire crypto industry due to its real-world financial infrastructure goals. Its positioning in cross-border payments, banking integration discussions, and liquidity solutions keeps it consistently relevant in long-term financial narratives. However, relevance does not automatically translate into extreme valuation scenarios without massive global economic shifts. What makes this situation even more interesting is that discussions around XRP often move between two extremes. On one side, there is highly optimistic forecasting driven by future financial system transformation. On the other side, there is strict financial realism that focuses on market capitalization limits, liquidity constraints, and global monetary structure. The tension between these two viewpoints is what keeps XRP constantly in debate within the crypto community. From an analytical perspective, the current conversation is not about confirming any specific price target. Instead, it is about understanding how rational expectations are formed in emerging markets like crypto, where uncertainty is high and future adoption paths are still developing. This is why the debate is gaining attention, because it is not just about XRP as a token, but about how investors think, calculate, and position themselves in highly speculative yet potentially transformative markets. And this is exactly the kind of discussion that continues to push XRP into the center of global crypto analysis, where every statement, interpretation, and reaction adds another layer to an already complex financial narrative. XRP Gold-Silver Scope. Now, to understand why this discussion around XRP is creating such strong reactions, we need to go deeper into how professional investors actually think when they evaluate long-term value in any financial asset. In traditional markets, especially in technology and infrastructure sectors, investors rarely focus on extreme single outcomes. Instead, they work with probability ranges, expected value models, and multiple future scenarios that include both success and failure paths. This is important because crypto assets like XRP are often compared to early-stage technology investments, even though the structure of crypto markets is very different. When people talk about extremely high price predictions for any digital asset, the key question is not just whether it is theoretically possible, but whether the probability of that outcome justifies current investment behavior. If an asset truly had even a small but meaningful chance of reaching a very high valuation, then logically large institutional players would begin positioning aggressively long before that outcome becomes visible. This is how capital flows in traditional markets, especially in sectors like artificial intelligence, cloud computing, and global payments infrastructure. However, in the case of XRP, the market behavior shows a more balanced and cautious approach from large-scale investors. While there is interest in its utility and its role in cross-border payment systems, the level of capital allocation does not reflect belief in extreme exponential valuation scenarios. This creates an interesting disconnect between retail speculation and institutional positioning, and this gap is one of the main reasons why debates around XRP pricing become so heated and controversial. At the same time, it is important to understand that XRP does not exist in isolation. Its value proposition is tied to global financial systems, banking infrastructure efficiency, liquidity optimization, and settlement speed improvements. These are real-world use cases, but they still operate within the boundaries of global economic scale. That means any realistic valuation model must consider the size of global financial flows, the adoption rate of blockchain-based systems, and the competitive landscape of other payment technologies. Another important factor in this discussion is market capitalization logic. Every asset in financial markets has a theoretical ceiling based on how much total value exists in the system it is trying to represent or capture. When price predictions reach extremely high levels, they often imply valuations that exceed or come close to the scale of entire global financial sectors. This is where skepticism naturally enters the conversation, because such scenarios require massive structural changes in the global economy, not just organic growth of a single asset. This is also why many experienced analysts emphasize the difference between utility growth and valuation expansion. An asset can become more widely used and more integrated into systems without necessarily reaching extreme price levels. Utility growth often leads to stable long-term appreciation, but valuation explosions require exponential adoption combined with massive liquidity inflows across global markets. These conditions are rare and usually take decades, if they happen at all. On the other side of the discussion, supporters of XRP's long-term potential argue that the global financial system itself is undergoing transformation. They believe that inefficiencies in cross-border payments, settlement delays, and liquidity fragmentation create space for blockchain-based systems to capture significant value over time. In that scenario, XRP could benefit as part of a broader infrastructure shift rather than as a standalone speculative asset. However, even in such a scenario, the scaling effect would still depend on how deeply these systems are integrated into global banking networks and how much transaction volume actually migrates to blockchain-based rails. Without massive real-world adoption at institutional levels, valuation assumptions remain speculative rather than structurally grounded. This is why the current debate is not simply about optimism or pessimism, It is about financial realism versus theoretical possibility. One side of the argument focuses on what could happen under ideal global adoption conditions, while the other side focuses on what is currently supported by observable market behavior and capital distribution patterns. As the crypto industry continues to mature, these debates will become more data-driven and less emotionally driven. Investors will increasingly rely on measurable adoption metrics, liquidity flows, and institutional participation rather than narrative-based projections. XRP sits directly in the middle of this transition, making it one of the most frequently analyzed assets in the entire digital economy. And this is exactly why conversations like this continue to grow, because they are not just about price speculation anymore. They are about how the future financial system might be structured and what role different digital assets might realistically play within that system. Now that we have broken down both sides of the argument, the most important question becomes very simple. What does all of this actually mean for XRP moving forward? And how should investors realistically interpret these types of viral discussions? The first thing to understand is that XRP continues to hold a strong position in the crypto market not because of speculation alone, but because it remains connected to real financial infrastructure conversations. Cross-border payments, liquidity solutions, and banking efficiency are not small ideas. These are large-scale global problems, and any technology that can improve even a fraction of that system naturally gains attention from both retail and institutional participants. However, attention and adoption are not the same thing as extreme valuation certainty. What we are seeing right now is a growing gap between narrative-driven expectations and structurally supported financial outcomes. On one side, social media and crypto communities often amplify extreme price possibilities because they create excitement and engagement. On the other side, real-world financial systems operate on liquidity, regulation, adoption speed, and capital constraints. These two worlds often clash, and XRP sits directly in the middle of that tension. From a realistic analytical perspective, XRP's future is more likely to be shaped by gradual adoption and integration rather than sudden exponential valuation jumps. This means steady growth cycles, increasing utility over time, and expansion of use cases within financial networks. That type of growth can still be significant, but it usually does not align with extreme prediction models that ignore global economic scale limitations. It is also important to highlight that markets often behave differently than expectations in the short term. Sentiment can drive rapid movements, narratives can create temporary hype cycles, and liquidity conditions can amplify price volatility. But over the long term, assets tend to settle into valuation ranges that reflect actual utility, adoption, and real-world capital flow integration. For XRP investors, the key takeaway is not to focus on isolated extreme price targets, but to focus on measurable progress. This includes adoption milestones, institutional partnerships, regulatory clarity developments, and real transaction usage in financial systems. These factors provide a more grounded way to understand long-term potential without relying purely on speculation. At the same time, it is also fair to acknowledge that innovation in financial systems can sometimes surprise markets. Technologies that initially seem limited can expand into broader use cases when global conditions change. That is why XRP remains a topic of continuous debate, because it sits at the intersection of innovation potential and financial reality. So the balanced perspective here is simple. Extreme predictions should be treated as theoretical scenarios, not guaranteed outcomes. Real value assessment should come from adoption progress, network usage, and integration into global financial systems. This approach helps investors stay grounded while still being aware of long-term possibilities. In the end, XRP's story is not just about price speculation. It is about how the future of money movement might evolve, and how digital assets could fit into that evolving structure over time. Whether that results in moderate growth or major transformation depends entirely on real-world adoption, not just online narratives. Call to action. If you want more deep analysis like this, make sure you stay connected with XRP Gold Silver Scope. We break down XRP news in a simple, clear, and realistic way, so you always understand what's really happening behind the hype.